Hello again and welcome to Arch Eats. My name is George Mahey.
I'm Cheryl Bear.
And today we have a special episode of Arch Eats.
This episode of Arch Eats is sponsored by Opera Theater of St. Louis.
We're going to talk about the venerable Tony's restaurant, which closed on February 15th of 2025, the day after Valentine's Day, which was appropriate because Tony's had been the home to thousands of Valentine's Day celebrations over its nearly 70-year history. It was owned by members of the Bommarito family since its inception, and it was the place to go to step out and to celebrate and to close that important business deal. With us today is James Bommarito, operating partner for the last decade. Hello, my friend.
Good to see you. Good to be here, George. It's my pleasure.
We're old buddies. So we'll get into why Tony's closed a bit later, but first let's talk about the restaurant and what made it so different. James, how about a brief synopsis of the timeline, and we'll stop along the way and tell a few stories. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Well, as you know, Tony started in 1946. That was when my grandfather started that, and he passed away in 49. My dad was a senior in high school, and there was a little kitchen in that little brick building that was at 826 North Broadway, and they were poor, and he had to work. So he talked to the Jesuits at St. Louis U High, and they allowed him to go to school till noon, and then at noon he'd go to the restaurant and work lunch and dinner, and his aunts would open up for breakfast. They were open back in those days for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And for that 1 year of high school, he was going to school and running a restaurant. Then he graduated in 49 from St. Louis U High, and he got into the business 100%. You know, that's what he wanted to do.
There was a great story. Let me interrupt you just for a second, because they said, we hear that you graduated from St. Louis University. And he said, well, I went through St. Louis University. I went into the cafeteria and out through the gym.
Right.
That's as far as that got. That was a good story.
Yeah, so, I mean, he was, 5'6", weighed 117 pounds. Tony's was on one of the busiest street corners in St. Louis. People everywhere. I mean, it must have been overwhelming for him. He didn't know anything about the restaurant business, so...
He was 17, for God's sake.
So my grandmother and my two great aunts, they helped him get started. And, he worked very hard, 17, 18, 19-hour days. It's crazy just to even think about how many hours he used to put in. But as time went on, he started moving around and going to other restaurants, and he started traveling a little bit. And he got ideas about how he could make his place better. And he'd go to Chicago, and he'd go to New York, and every once in a while he'd go to California, and he'd pick up these ideas and bring them back to St. Louis, and not copy what they did, but he'd use his own technique to incorporate those ideas into Tony's. And so gradually it became more of a upper level restaurant than it was in 1946 and in 1949 when he took over. So originally when he took over, it was called Tony's Spaghetti House.
So nothing like when people hear Tony's, they think it's the upper echelon of dining. Humble beginning.
It was just a little spaghetti house.
Wow.
They served some breakfast and things like that. And then as time went on, he changed the name to Tony's Steakhouse. And then in the early 60s, I think when my dad got this first holiday award, he changed the name from Tony's Steakhouse to Tony's, period. And my uncle was working with him then, Tony. And initially, he wanted to have the best restaurant in St. Louis. But then it got to the point where, hey, I think I want to be one of the best Italian restaurants in the country. And then by the 80s, they were really on the scene at that point.
And even early on in the 80s, Tony's was winning national awards, getting recognized on the national scene.
Exactly. But the two big ones were the Mobile 5-Star and the AAA 5 Diamond. Mm-hmm. So the first one that came along was the Mobile, and that was the most prestigious. There was only 12 to 13 restaurants in the whole country.
Oh, wow.
To have that. And it was the only Italian ever in the history of the award. And then shortly thereafter, that several years later, got the AAA too. So we had both, the Mobile and the AAA, and there was only 9 restaurants in the country that had both. So that was a hell of an accomplishment for a guy that didn't go to formal training for cooking or anything of that nature. He learned on the fly. But he was energetic, and we did travel a lot. He got ideas, and he wasn't afraid to ask advice from people that knew more than he did. And it just worked out. But, all the hard work I mean, I don't think that there's ever been anybody, I've never seen anybody in my life that put in the hours that he did. He was unbelievable. His energy level, his pride. I mean, if my dad would have gotten into the computer business, he would have been the CEO of IBM.
Wow.
I mean, that's the kind of person, no matter what he would have gotten into, he was going to be the best at it, no matter what it took.
And there were so many different things that Tony's got to be known for. I think one of the more famous ones is the maitre d' famously escorted guests up the flight of stairs to the dining room backwards.
Well, that was my uncle's idea. And the philosophy behind that was never turn your back on a guest. So they started walking upstairs backwards. And, you know, even to the point where we closed the restaurant February 15th, people almost every night would say, I remember when I used to come in here when I was younger and people used to walk up the stairs. I mean, almost every night I heard that comment. That was a good thing that they did. And they started that in the 60s, and we're still known for it.
We'll be right back.
Looking for a night that satisfies more than your appetite? At Opera Theater of St. Louis, A Midsummer Night's Dream is serving up a feast for the senses. Imagine yourself enjoying a perfect pre-show picnic in beautiful gardens, followed by a wildly romantic romp through a world of magic, mischief, and some seriously stunning costumes. This is opera and Shakespeare like you've never seen or tasted before. Opera Theater's 2025 festival season is playing now through June 29th. Learn more and get your tickets at experienceopera.org. And now, back to the show.
The other thing that I hear mentioned a lot was the kitchen, what went on in the kitchen and how orders were placed in the kitchen. And when you guys were downtown, you could get a tour of Tony's kitchen. I didn't know anybody would take people on tours of the kitchen.
Yeah, we
That
did.
was a big deal. Talk about that ordering system, because that was crazy.
Well, when my dad first got started, he didn't know exactly how to run a kitchen. So waiters were talking back and forth to the cooks across the line, and they were getting to the point where they were so busy that there was too much talking and there were mistakes. Things were getting confused, and with all that talking back there, it caused tension. So when you have tension like that, creates mistakes. So my dad came up with a microphone system where the waiter comes into the kitchen, one person talks, and then when they turn the microphone on, the cooks and the waiter, they meet eyes, and the waiter will order to the cooks and look at him and order, and he goes right down the line. There was 4 stations: the grill station, we had a steam station where we steamed all the vegetables, and then saute where we did all the veal and the chicken, and then the pasta. So we would go from one station, station 1, which was steaks, and then go down the line, not be back bopping forth because that would be confusing. But the philosophy was one person talking, they're all listening, everybody understands, and that really, really was critical in creating a better service environment there.
It was a quiet kitchen because only one person was speaking.
You weren't allowed to talk.
The only
Kitchen.
person that made any noise at all was the guy sweeping the floor. Was that really true that there was a guy there that was sweeping that floor all the time during service?
We swept and mopped the floor every half hour.
Oh my goodness.
Think
That's
about
something
that.
else.
Every
Wow.
half hour.
And-
That seriously, that kitchen was unbelievable. All the silver, the copper, sterling silver, stainless steel. It was something. You know, it was gorgeous. It was a piece of art.
I feel like what people really felt so special about Tony's was every last detail was thought of. Even the details, like you said, in the kitchen, even if you're not taking a tour, even the stuff you can't see, it was all taken care of.
From the moment you call to make your reservation, that's our first transaction. That's the first communication. That's got to be right. Then the moment they pull up, the valet. I mean, a lot of restaurants don't have valet. It's a courtesy that you extend. Do it right, it can work against you, okay? So the valet is the second communication. And then the valet is the last communication on the way out. So, you know, a warm welcome and a fond farewell. That's you know,
It's really important.
exactly. It's very important.
So, speaking of valet, when I talked to you a few years ago, you were telling me all of these fun things that your father pioneered in the restaurant scene, in the St. Louis restaurant scene, I should say.
St. Louis, right?
Yeah, valet was one of them, tableside service, wine list, Crummers. I think
Crummers.
you mentioned Crummers. Wine glasses preset. And the one that I thought was very exciting is the baked potato. The baked potato is so ubiquitous now. I can't even imagine it not being.
We didn't even have it on the menu. My dad was in New York and there was a baked potato on the menu.
Mhm.
He didn't know what the hell it was.
Huh.
You know, I mean, he knew, but it had never been served in St. Louis. So he decided to put on the menu in New York, and it was sour cream, baked potato with sour cream and chives. That was put on the menu, but it didn't sell. It just didn't sound good, sour cream and chives. So he changed it from sour cream to cream and chives, and it started picking up a little momentum. And eventually, you know, everybody had it. And then when everybody had it, he took it off because he didn't want to be like everybody else. He took it off the menu. Like,
Funny as
sort of
that.
like the whole toasted ravioli
Yes.
thing and all that. You know, Dad was one of the first ones to have toasted ravioli. But one that you could start buying at frozen in the grocery stores, Tony's wouldn't have it. We had it available, but just not on the menu, you know. So we always wanted to be a notch above everybody else, doing things different. That's the story behind the baked potato.
Talk about the second location, the one that was so big. I remember you telling me that I think it was 13,500.
13,500 square feet.
Wow.
Which is humongous, and it didn't appear to be that way.
No.
Why was it that way? Because there were a lot of nooks, a lot of crannies, little side rooms, places for banquets and private parties.
Well, we had 3 rooms. I don't call it the main dining room because I never used to like to use that phrase. Because if you say main dining room, we had 2 other dining rooms, and somebody said, well, no, I don't want to sit in that room.
Yeah, the secondary room.
Yeah,
no,
right.
thank
I'll
you.
overflow.
No, I want to sit in the main dining room. I had to train my maitre d' to stop using the word main dining room. I used to tell them, do you want to sit in the big room or do you want to sit in the wine room? Or do you want to sit in the cherry room? We had another room, but the walls were cherry. But yeah,
Much
we
more
had
civilized than the back row.
we had 24 tables in the large dining room. We had 12 tables in the wine room. And then the cherry room was a room that sat 50, and we used that for private dining. Now, when we went from the second location to the third location, that was 8,500 square feet. Obviously,
And we're talking
a
about Clayton.
Clayton, a lot smaller and just a whole different animal.
We'll get into that a little bit later because that was a big difference, losing 5,000 square feet.
Yeah.
That's a big number.
And, you know, probably $1.5 million in revenue
Right.
due to this size.
Mhm.
Exactly. Talk about the jackets required rule. I mean, that was a thing for a long, long time. And everybody, I kind of liked it because had to dress up to go to Tony's. It was mandatory. And eventually the world got more casual. Then you guys relaxed that policy. Is that okay with you? Or would you have rather kept the jackets required policy?
I think that during the week, I would prefer people to wear a sport coat. Now, in order to get the 5-star and the 5 diamond, there was a dress code.
Oh.
So sport jackets were required. Then they laxed that. And so we did. We used to have to wear a tie. We had ties and jackets. And then it was just jackets. And then after a while, we relaxed the jackets, became business casual. But 90% of the people that came in wore a sport coat during the week. And I would say 90% of the people that came in on Friday and Saturday wore a tie. And that stayed consistent all the way up to the time that we closed, February 15th. People, they like to get dressed up. And Tony's is the only restaurant, maybe the St. Louis Club is the only restaurant in St. Louis where people can get dressed up, feel good about themselves, go into a really nice place. They like that. It creates a better feeling, a better atmosphere. And it worked, you know, and it was great going in there. And all these people have on nice coats and ties, and ladies have on their night dresses. It was, you know, it was special. It was the only restaurant that you would walk into and see that.
It was so well known throughout the Midwest and then throughout the country. So when any celebrity of any notoriety came to town, they would go to Tony's. Do you have any interesting celebrity stories, good or bad, that you can relate?
Wayne Gretzky came in one night, and this is when we required a sport coat. And obviously, one of the greatest athletes in the history of sports. And he didn't have a sport coat on, and we didn't let him in.
Oh.
You didn't have a sport coat for him?
He wouldn't put one on.
Oh, goodness.
But the next time he came, he had a sport coat.
So he came back.
He did
didn't
come
hold
back.
it against you.
He came
Oh.
back, and he came back more than once. But a lot of people just didn't want to wear jackets. A lot of California people, that started out in California first, where they laxed those codes, and people that were coming from the West Coast, they didn't want to wear it. So we understood that because eventually people would just not come in. So then you have to make a business decision. So we made the decision, all right, a lot of people are going to wear jackets, but a lot of them aren't. But we can't afford to turn them away. So we just started taking them, and it worked out.
And I recall there was something when there was a Cardinal game in town, you'd get a lot of folks in Cardinal jerseys, but they couldn't come in to Tony's because they didn't have a jacket. But didn't you allow guys in jerseys for like at the first seating?
We did for the first seating. We allowed Cardinal attire till 6:30. And then after 6:30.
And get the heck out and go to the stadium.
Well, you said that. I didn't.
What about embarrassing moments? You've had to see your fair share. And then the one thing that I always have heard, I don't know if this is an urban legend or not, but you were known for knowing every detail about your guests to make sure that they had a perfect experience. And there's a story that there was a man with either his mistress or his wife, and then the other came in and you had to escort somebody out the back. Is that true? Did that actually happen? Or maybe it happened more than once. I don't know.
I think you might have dreamt that.
Maybe I did. I swear it's an urban legend. Have you heard that, George?
I've heard it, and I want to say your dad told me that. It might have been your brother. I don't know.
I'm not going there.
Maybe it's a circle of trust. We don't talk about that.
Let's just say a lot of things happen there.
But you're right, Cheryl. You did have a method of keeping track of your customers,
Well,
what they liked, what they didn't like.
We did, my dad, myself, we knew everybody. And sometimes, a divorce would happen and it was messy. And she may come in with another person and we would go over the reservation sheet every night. All right, this person's coming in. This is the deal with them. Make sure you put them on that side of the room. Put this person over here. Put this person upstairs. So there's a strategy. You just don't go into a night and just throw everybody in it. You have a lot of sensitive things going on. So go over the sheets every night. Make sure that you place the people where they need to go so they're comfortable.
Your dad told me this, and I thought it was fascinating. I guess he kept track of people's desires
Really kind of started that.
On index cards.
He did, and then I started putting it on the computer. He would print out sheets every night, and it would tell you what they drank, what items. See, most people that come to Tony's, it was an extensive menu, but most people stuck to 2 or 3 things. They would order 2 or 3 things every time they came in, okay? So we kept a log on that, and I would print that out, and then I'd give it to the waiters, and they would review it, and then when they came in, they knew what they liked.
But how that whole thing started was on index cards. And your dad told me that he learned that from his tailor. And he said, this guy always knew what shirts I had, what suits I had. He found out later that this guy kept track of all this stuff on index cards. And he said, before that, I thought he was the smartest son of a bitch I've ever met. But anyway, Vince picked that up and it became...
Yeah, it was. We did have it on index cards to start. And then the index cards started getting filled up.
Sure.
And then the waiters were losing them. We'd put them on their food cards. And so I said, hey, we got to change
Hopefully they
this.
didn't end up on somebody's table.
Yeah, right.
We got to change it. So I started putting them in a computer and then boom. It was impressive. Not too many places in the country do that.
Does everybody always behave themselves? Did you ever have to, let's say, escort someone out of Tony's?
We've had escorted quite a few out over the years. Mostly they just had a little bit too much. And, it's normally because of the language and with the women and children sometimes. We would ask them politely twice, and then the third time, that was going to be it. Everybody knows who Buddy Hackett is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old comedian. He had to be escorted out.
Oh.
He couldn't quite keep the mouth quiet. So my dad warned him a few times, and he had to be escorted out, not to his pleasure. I can tell you that. I mean, for the 79 years we were in business, geez, we had very, very few problems. 99.9% of the time, people acted like they were perfect, like it was an honor to be there.
It was.
Yeah.
It was the best. So Tony's used an unusual service system, a French brigade system. Basically, 3 folks were assigned to every table. And that was something that I don't know that you're going to see too much. If you started a restaurant today, would you do that kind of service?
It just depends on what kind of restaurant I want to open. We had 6 tables. I call them stores. So that's the way I tried to explain that to my waiters. I said each store has 6 tables in it. And we had 18 tables. Let's say we have 18 tables. So that would be 3 stations, 3 little stores. And there would be 9 waiters, 3 waiters per store, or 3 waiters per every 6 tables. So you have a captain who's the most experienced of the 3. Then you would have we called them a beverage and dessert waiter. He was the second most experienced. And then the food waiter, who would take the orders from the captain, order the food, check on it, bring it out, help serve. This was from trial and error over decade. When my dad started, there was a head waiter and then another waiter, and he would do all of the food, the drinks, the dessert, and that didn't work. You needed another person. So that 3 waiter system, if you want to give really good service, listen, we did this for a long time. It works. I mean, if you go to New York and some of these other fine restaurants, they may not have it just like that, but it's similar. You have to get the food out. You want to try to get the food out without breaks and courses. Listen, if somebody wants to stay there for 6 hours, that's fine. But we're going to get them served in a crisp way, so no breaks and courses. And if they want to stay another 2 hours after dessert, that's fine. That's up to them. But if they want to get out and they want to leave, that's also an option too. So that 3 waiter system really worked for us.
You must have had an army of people.
That system, it really kind of puts you in a situation, because if somebody didn't show up, it could cause a problem, not only just for that station or that store, but it creates problems in the kitchen too. That's the way the system worked. That's the way the system was designed. And when you deviate, it doesn't work as well. So usually I put an extra person on the schedule every night just to make sure I was covered.
You said that these people were very, very well trained. It took a long time to train them. And consequently, when the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, I remember you telling me, we just can't reopen and grab people off the street and say, let's go ahead and wait some tables. It was a big deal to be a server at Tony's. And consequently, you did something that I've never seen anybody do. You paid your employees during the pandemic so they wouldn't go anywhere.
I did. And that was a big expense. It takes a year for a Tony's waiter to know his job decent. And there's no way. We were closed. We closed March 17th of 20. We reopened March 28th of 21. There's no way I could let those people go, and they went out and they'd find other jobs, and then I'd have to hire a new. That would be impossible.
You would need a whole nother year to train.
So I paid my people. I spent over $1 million on my own money. We didn't get that much PPP money from the government, and that was gone like that. So we spent over $1 million in keeping all of my employees there. But when we opened up on the 28th, we were firing on all pistons. We had 2 weeks of training because it was a whole new system and upstairs, downstairs. But when we opened, we were 110.
I mean, those guys are so well trained. I remember your dad telling me that I saw some on his desk. There were tests, waiter, server, back waiter tests, and he called them 50s. And I remember telling you that, and you said, yeah, I did the same thing, except I call them hundreds because there's 100 questions on there now. Is that right?
Oh,
that's
my
right.
Goodness.
Well, we give them a test every year. Basic things like what's in a Manhattan, what's in a grasshopper, what's in the quail sauce, how do we make the Chianti sauce. We had employee meetings every day, so we would go over things that happened the night before, new things, new wines that were taken off the night before, new wines that we added, all kinds of things. And I used to have the captains give the meetings. So every night a different captain would give a meeting, and then I would oversee the meeting. In the meetings, I used to say, I didn't ever want to use the word don't. I said, our system is this. The way we do, I don't like to be negative in the meetings. We wanted it to be positive. I always disliked that word don't. It just always sounded so negative to me. So I used to try to train my guys. Our system is this. This is the way we do it here, blah, blah. Little things like that make a big difference.
Yeah.
And it helps with attitude, positive attitude, just the way body language. It's very important.
You've been doing this your whole life at this point, but I understand for a little bit, you went away to school, you had a different career, you came back. So tell us about that. Did you always feel like this was your birthright and that you would come back, or were you trying to forge a different path? And then what did draw you back
Well,
to the restaurant?
I went to Rice in Houston, Rice University, and then I went to work for Anheuser-Busch in New York, Manhattan. And I had worked for them and for the brewery in Chicago, LA, and Manhattan. And then they built the new Kiel Center. And my dad partnered up with Levy Corporation out of Chicago, and they took over the food and beverage at the Kiel Center. Big job. And it was not only like hockey, you had concerts, and the Billikens were playing there, and it was a big ordeal. So my dad sent my brother over there, Vince. So he wasn't at Tony's anymore, really, because almost every Saturday night, which was our big night, but a lot of nights were, but he was over there at the Kiel.
Sure.
And so he asked me to come back to St. Louis, help him out with that. I had no idea when I graduated from college. I mean, if you would have told me really seriously at 2025 of February 15th, I would have owned this restaurant for 7 or 8 years. There's just no way. I didn't think I was going to ever be in the restaurant business. But, you know, we lost that contract when the Blues Kiel Partners sold the team. But I just ended up staying. And I've been here, 33 years I was in the business. But I used to go down to the restaurant all the time when I was a little boy with the old guy, you know, and I was always around it. No, I had never any intentions of getting into it, and here we are.
Here we are, right?
We'll be right back. This episode of Our Cheats is supported by Stages St. Louis. One actor plays the detective, the other plays 13 suspects, and they both play the piano. Witness the murderously funny musical Murder for Two, May 30th through June 29th at the Kirkwood Performing Arts Center. Visit stagesstlewis.org or call 314-821-2407 to get your tickets today.
And now, back to the show.
And let's talk about the Clayton location. You moved from downtown to Clayton, and there was some discussion about that. A lot of folks said, why did you do it? You shouldn't have done it. I wish you would have stayed downtown. But that was a business decision. I think at the time I recall you guys saying, you know, most of our clientele lives out west, and there isn't as much convention business as there used to be. This was a business decision. We decided to get a little closer to our customer. I guess, does that sum it up?
It was better for us than the third location. The third location was beautiful. I mean, I got probably one of the best architects in the world to help me with it from Manhattan. But that building that we were in downtown was built in 1971, 72, and everything in there was old. All that equipment was starting to fall apart. The HVAC in the building, we were having all kinds of internal problems with the HVAC. The plumbing was this, and the building wasn't willing to make it the investment to make our life easier down there. So I made a decision. I said, okay, I was friends with Mr. Neidorf, who was the CEO of Centene, and we sat down with my attorney, Tom O'Toole Jr., and met with Mr. Neidorf on multiple occasions, and we put a deal together. And it made sense. And then I don't want to get into all the details of the deal that Tom O'Toole Jr. and I made, but I will say this, and I probably shouldn't say this, but if Mr. Neidorf were still alive, I'd be at work right now. That's all I want to say about that. There was a lot of things that went on. So 7 months into the deal, after we opened in Clayton, Mr. Neidorf died. And the new group that came in, they didn't have the same ideas. And they weren't from St. Louis. That was the end of it.
So Tony's just didn't mean to them what it means to someone who's a St. Louisan.
Correct.
How much of it had to do with the fact that you didn't, like you said, there was $1.5 million at least lost in banquet business. I know that not having that space had to be part of the decision. Was it a financial deal?
Well, 2 problems. Number one, we were busy during the week at Tony's, the Clayton Tony's, the third Tony's. The problem was we had a lot less tables in the Clayton location that we had in the downtown location. So on Friday and Saturday night, we were not able to serve another 80 people or 90 people a night because of the size of the restaurant. So if you take 200 people a week times whatever they spend, and then you take away a private dining facility, which sat 50, and then that would be booked 2 or 3 times a week. You take that revenue away from your stream, that's significant. Well, going into that,
Yeah, I was going to say, playing the devil's advocate, did you know that going into it?
we did know that. And Tom O'Toole and myself and Michael, we understood that. And Centene was going to compensate us for that loss. Well, when he died, they weren't interested in doing that anymore.
So that was a lot of revenue you had to make up.
Impossible. When you take $1.5 million out of your revenues, it was impossible. And, I can't say I blame them. I mean, they're not in the restaurant business. I mean, it was a deal I made with another person, and I don't want to point fingers, but that's what happened. And, here we are.
And you were there, obviously, till the very end. But were there days that you just said, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm tired of the daily grind. I want out.
There was never a day that when I got up that I didn't want to go to work. I loved what I was doing. It's just the stress, financial stress of that whole thing was impossible. And it was wearing me out. But I miss you guys. I miss George and his wife coming in. I miss all my friends, Jeff Fox and Jim Davis and all those great people that came in. I miss all those guys. And, that's what I miss the most. It's not the revenue. I miss the people.
So for someone who didn't want to get into the restaurant business, what did you ultimately end up? I know you said the people. What felt so special about it? What did you ultimately love the most? Was it the hospitality? Was it the community that you were creating? All of the above? What do you think when you say you loved your job?
Well, I
What'd you
think
love?
what was the most rewarding thing was that when all these people, they walk out of my restaurant, they spend a lot of money and they're thanking me. And I'm like, I should be on my knees thanking these people. And here they come in, they spend their hard-earned money, prom kids, college kids, whatever, all groups. And they're thanking me on their way out. And that really, if you've never experienced anything like that, as you can imagine, it makes you feel good, and it makes you come back the next day wanting to be better. And we made mistakes. I think Tony's batted closer to 1,000 than any other restaurant in the country. I really believe that. But the key is that when you have a negative, you got to try to make that a positive for you, and when you figure out that formula and how you're going to handle that, that's key. So a lot of things can happen in the restaurant business and did, and they were negatives, but I made them positives. That works for you instead of against you, depending on how you handle it. Remember, you can't say hello if you don't say it right. That's important in that business.
You've got all this experience. You've been at this for how many? 30-something years.
Well, I'm 58 and basically been doing it my whole life.
So for the first time in your life, Tony's has been closed for 5 months, and all your nights now are free. All your days are free. What have you been doing with yourself, and what's next for James Bommarito?
Well, I've been eating out a lot. How's that sound? I put on 7 pounds. I just been going out. I've stayed in touch with a lot of my old customers or guests, and I've been going out with a lot of them. They've invited me, and I've invited them. And, I've just been doing the yard and planting my tomato plants and keeping up with the grass and taking care of the dog and maintaining the house and getting out to a lot of restaurants. I've been down to the Four Seasons a few times. I go out to see my buddy Lombardo's down in the Union Station, and my buddy Jimmy Fiala, and all these guys. I couldn't get to their restaurants when I was working all these nights. So, I'm just trying to enjoy it a little bit. But I will say I'm getting a little bored and I'm getting antsy. So
You're going to get back into it?
I'm going to do something. I can't sit on my hands like this. Bommaritos aren't like that.
Yeah.
You know what I think you should do? I think you should write a book. I think you should write a book about the legend and legacy of St. Louis's finest fine dining restaurant. And you don't have to write it right now, but do the interviews now. Talk to your brothers and your sister are still here. Your mom is still here. Your Uncle Tony is still here. All these folks, you could interview them right now and then just write that book in your easy chair whenever you want to. But you really should do that because there are so many stories, some we told today, but there are 1,000 fun stories from Tony's that this is the way you do it, folks. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
You
So
just got to remember what happens at Tony's stays at Tony's, apparently.
Well, it's not as bad as Vegas, but I'll tell you one of the great Tony stories. I was just starting, and Red Shadings was still alive, and he brought his daughter down to Tony's, and Robert Goulet was sitting in a chair or a table just right next to Shadings, just by coincidence. And we brought the birthday cake out for Red's daughter, and Goulet stood up and sang happy birthday to her in front of the entire restaurant.
Oh, my gosh.
Tears coming from people's eyes. And you know how Goulet was. He was good friends with my dad. Used to send him a Christmas card every year. But that was one of the coolest moments. I mean, we served them all. Like Sinatra, and we served 4 presidents. But that was one of the coolest, one of the neatest things.
Spontaneous. It just happened.
We ever had. That was cool. We've had streakers. We've had them all. I mean, we've had everything in that place.
Definitely need to write a book.
Yeah, no doubt.
You know, we could talk about Tony's and our experiences and other people's experiences. Everybody has a Tony's story. And we could go on for hours here, but we're going to bring this to a close and wish James farewell and, you know, a great next chapter, whatever that might be. If it's a restaurant, let us know where it is, and Cheryl will be there to review it, and I'll be there to hang out and have a few drinks. But anyway, James, thanks so much for joining us on RGs. We really, really appreciate your time.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Be sure to follow us and share with your friends. And we always provide links in the show notes for everything you heard about today. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow along on Instagram at St. Louis Mag. And feel free to give us a follow personally at George Mahey and Cheryl A. Bear.
If you loved what you heard, show us some love by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And if you're hungry for even more content, you can subscribe to our dining newsletters for the freshest coverage on the local restaurant and culinary scene.
Best dishes, and see you next time.